On this episode of Athletic Training Chat, we have Troy Hoehn. Troy and I connected using the NATA's membership AT Gather portal. Just happened to be clicking through, looking at who was all in there, and sure enough, found Troy, who happened to be working in the same health system as I was, and so connected. And since then, we've been able to touch base on a monthly basis, just kind of talking about ideas, things specific to our employer. And so it's been really a great thing, a great way to connect. Highly recommend people checking it out. But Troy has done a ton in his career, and that's what we talk about in this episode. Just everything that he has done, all the different things he's been involved with, how that's evolved over the course of his career, and how it's continuing to evolve as he keeps learning more on different avenues in patient care and how to care for everybody that he may come into contact with in his role in the secondary school and as a supervisor. So lots covered, lots of really good information. As always, we are powered by Mueller Sports Medicine. Please check them out for your sports medicine needs. All kinds of new things coming from them all the time. Always worth checking out. Everything's in swing already. Be sure to hit them up if you need to get something quickly to get going and really to make sure that you have all your sports medicine needs. We appreciate them greatly. But without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Welcome to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We are on with Troy Hoehn, who is an athletic training supervisor at Mayo Clinic Health System in the Mankato area in Minnesota, along with doing just about everything else when it comes to service/volunteering within state and national organizations, which we'll talk a little bit about. But I actually connected with Troy as I was clicking through the mentor-mentee aspect, I believe, of NATA Gather. I don't honestly remember where that all was, but I was just kind of scrolling through, wanted to see who was out there to connect with, and saw Troy, saw that we worked for the same organization, but in very different locations with very different athletic training services provided in varying degrees. So I thought it'd be a good reason to reach out, and I'd say we shoot about 60 to 70% on our monthly calls just to touch base and bounce ideas off and look at different things. But ultimately, finally got to the point where we are now recording this episode to just talk about all kinds of different things that Troy has gotten into throughout his career. But before we get into all of that, I want to turn it over to you, Troy, to kind of fill in your background, and then we'll jump into some of the specific questions.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Joel. And, going back to that mentor-mentee thing, I think that's, honestly, it's one of those things that I think, you sign up for, and unless people are reaching out, you kind of forget it's there.
For
And
sure.
obviously, if, at this point in time, it's certainly how we connected. We maybe would have connected in a different way eventually anyway. But at the same time, if anybody is out there, listening and don't know anything about it, I think look it up. It could be a great resource to potentially connect with somebody that's maybe has like-minded interests of you, and maybe they're in a completely different area of the country even, but you could obviously maybe just find that relationship and connection too. So it is a great resource from that perspective.
I did
Um,
sign up as a mentor and a mentee, so that you can do both. Nobody's reached out though.
that's true. You have both options. Um, Otherwise, yeah, I kind of got, started a little bit as, when I was in high school, I guess, as far as kind of where athletic training got me to where I'm at now, I guess a little bit. I was in high school. I really enjoyed sports. I was injured late or in my senior year. I was in a car accident actually. So I mean, at that point in time, that kind of limited obviously my activity, and we didn't necessarily have an athletic trainer that was at our school all the time. We did have somebody there for our football games at that point in time. Nobody that I actually interacted with at that point in time either. And, looking back now, I almost wish I would have known more. But obviously, in the way that things kind of fell into place, that was just kind of the way it happened. And I joke a little bit because I was somewhat interested in veterinary medicine, when I was going through high school. And so I had kind of a general interest in medicine, and kind of in the sciences, but never really pursued that. But yet now, when I joke that I help a different kind of animal when we talk about helping high school athletes or collegiate athletes or whatever else it might be, or any of our patients sometimes that we interact with. So, but ultimately, from there, I kind of just, I was being in Mankato and with Mankato State University at the time, because I am that old that was the name of the college at that point in time, but now Minnesota State University, Mankato. It was local and close to home. And at that point in time, easy to just kind of, enroll there. And that was kind of the plan. And athletic training, though, at that point in time wasn't necessarily the intent, but, I started looking at the options for majors, and I kind of just saw athletic training, knew I loved sports, knew I wasn't going to be continuing to play them, and wanted to just kind of see more what that was about, and kind of enrolled in that intro class, and kind of never really looked back, and probably honestly put in, I don't even know how many hours I put in, as far as observation time in the athletic training room. And just I really wanted to kind of be as immersed in it as I could at that point in time. My side joke to that was I worked for my dad, who owned a hardware store, and I didn't necessarily love that job, and he knew that. But yet, so maybe I just use it as a way to get out of having to go to work, because I could say, hey, I've got to stay at school and do this stuff. But really loved it, really, from that point in time. And that's kind of what got me at least into athletic training. Then I guess when it comes to the job side of things, I initially, when I got as I was going through college, I was a little bit in a unique situation. I got married between my junior and senior year of undergrad, and then our first child was born just before I graduated from college. So some of my classmates obviously were going off to grad school, and at that point in time with a young family, I just didn't really feel like that was the right choice to make, just from a financial perspective. So really just started looking for jobs, and ended up out in Michigan, and worked in Jackson, Michigan at Foot Hospital at the time, which I don't think is the name of the hospital anymore. I don't know what it is now, but and did outreach athletic training there, and worked in their physical therapy clinic, and kind of got to know a little bit about it, and kind of got my feet wet out there, and really enjoyed that job. But ultimately, it was still about 12 hours from home, and with the young family, trying to get back closer to home. And when I was kind of starting to look to get back closer to home, ultimately there was a job at the Orthopedic and Fracture Clinic, which at the time in Mankato was the only company that was hiring athletic trainers outside of the college themselves. And I kind of, was able to get into that role. And I ask a lot of the students that I work with now, you know, dream big and push 10 years out from now, and just what would you want to be doing? And I really ask that question just so that I can help guide them in some of their decisions a little bit, to see what they want to do. But ultimately also, it's something that I'm just curious to kind of know where they want to be. And I always tell them, if I were to answer that question that I asked them, being back at OFC at that point in time, and then back at Mankato East High School, which was my alma mater, was kind of what I would have wanted to do. And so luckily, it only took me a year to get to that spot, and jumped into that role. And I was there for 20 years, as the head athletic trainer there, and worked at, again, kind of clinic outreach functions, and being the head athletic trainer at that point in time. And then the opportunity about 4 years came up, where Mayo Clinic Health System was expanding their sports medicine and athletic training services here in Mankato, and kind of took that opportunity to explore that option, and kind of luckily kind of got myself into this position now, and I'm really enjoying it. And so that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of just kind of those 25-ish years, I guess.
It's funny to hear your story, because like I had no idea what athletic training was, other than I had seen kinesiology on the outside of a weight room when I was in high school, and thought that's what I wanted to do. Heard about athletic training on my freshman orientation, had no idea what it was, thought it sounded cool. We were supposed to do a bunch of observe hours too. I think I did like 3 and ended up getting into the program and turned it around. So definitely did not do the same amount to diving in, but glad that it worked out that way. Uh, you obviously, just as you gave in your short history of what you've done in your career, worked in a variety of different companies, variety of settings, kind of bouncing back and forth, looking at all the different things. How have you adapted in each of those roles, and how has that benefited you, in your role now as a supervisor? And I also would be curious, you know, when you said what's your goal 10 years ahead as you're talking to students, if this you would have considered this your goal and how that just has evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's unique because, outside of that year in Michigan, I've kind of always been in a supervisory role. I've always been, depending on, I was called head athletic trainer at one place, supervisor at the other place, but ultimately the
Sure.
role was the same. So I've kind of always been overseeing the staff. And I've always said too that, probably the thing that it still bugs me to this day when people say, well, yeah, that's my boss. And I guess, technically that's the case, but yet I don't feel that way.
Sure.
I feel like all of my staff are kind of my colleagues, and I feel like we all work together, and I'm going to lean on them as much as hopefully they lean on me for times. And I'm probably going to learn just as much from them sometimes too. And hopefully I allow a little bit of learning for them. But, overall though, I think just over the course of time, the things that I've learned obviously is, I think part of that still is the process of kind of continuing to kind of have that colleague mentality, I guess, with my staff. I feel like that's kind of allowed me to grow a little bit more through that process. And I've always tried to not be somebody who micromanages. I know that, obviously in these situations when we're doing these, we're in a spot and a lot of our staff is in a completely separate area. We're not in one of these situations where we're all working together on a unit on a daily basis,
Right.
or interacting on a daily basis necessarily, at least in person. So we kind of have to have some confidence with our staff to allow them to do the job that we know that they can do. And so I don't want to try to get in their way of doing that sometimes. Obviously, we've all learned that people do things differently, whether it's taping an ankle or maybe the way they go about their evaluations or how they do some different managing situations. And all of that's perfectly fine. And we all get to the same end goal. But, I think that just over those years, I've kind of learned to kind of continue to lean on that, but also to get into a position where you can kind of be in the room to help make those decisions. And I think I'm in a place now where that is happening. And again, you're not always making the ultimate decision, but you're helping guide those decisions. And I think now at this point in my career, I do think that that's important for me to be able to kind of provide the expertise to allow those decisions, kind of throughout the enterprise, so to speak, to help hopefully make productive and positive change, not just for me and my staff, but I think for athletic training in general, and what kind of is going to fit better for everybody.
I like the colleague option of, just a viewpoint of that. I think that's, working. I'm big on the, I work with you. I don't, or you work, we work with each other. You don't work for me necessarily type of a thing where, yes, there's some of that structure when it's needed, but is not the standard operating procedure, if you will.
Nope, absolutely.
One of the big questions, because and I may just add this so people can go back and take a look at it, is the list of things you've done in terms of service and volunteer work. How did you get started in it? And every time you and I talk on a monthly basis, it seems like somehow you're serving on another committee or doing something else. How do you balance that into your work and personal life? It's easy to sign up for it and just kind of be there, but then to really contribute and drive things forward, how do you manage all of that?
Have a
Asking
patient
for a
family.
friend.
Have a patient family. My wife says multiple times that she doesn't think I say no to anything, and she is probably right. Although I do specifically point out the times that I do say no, just so that she's aware that it does happen from time to time.
Fair,
Um,
fair.
Honestly, how it got started, I think it was just an interest, but I think also a big interest, and I think this is important too. And I think it's important for all of us as athletic trainers, no matter what role we play. If we are interested in getting involved in anything, to make sure that the people that we're working with also kind of see that. So, I mean, I guess what I'm saying for my role is that a lot of my mentors and a lot of the instructors that I had back in college, we're all involved and they had been doing things and they were, and I was seeing that and I was hearing a little bit of that just kind of through what they were doing on the service that they were doing. And I think it kind of just showed me at an early point in my career that you could do both, that you could still continue to have your career and still be able to continue and do volunteer work and kind of serve your profession. So it really, probably almost 20-ish years ago is kind of when I kind of just started to get interested, and obviously being in the secondary school setting primarily at the time, but yet also being on the clinic side of things and working a little bit in the PT clinic, there was at the time there was a clinic industrial and corporate committee, and then there was a secondary school committee. So I kind of just basically applied to be a part of both of those because I felt like both of those fit for our state organization.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately that clinic industrial corporate committee, is now no longer, and it sure has morphed a gazillion different times into multiple different committees, from what the title of it was then. But so I was on that kind of just in the time frame that it ran for, which is a few years. And then, the secondary school committee, I never really left from that point in time. I think I jumped on in about 2005 and was a committee member for a number of years. And then I was the chair of that committee for 10 years, and then had stepped back from the chair role and have just continued to be a committee member now since then. So, that's certainly been where the kind of the primary passion, I guess, has been, from that committee work side of things, as far as what I was, doing then at the state level. And then, as I got going, Paul Bruning, who was also one of the state leaders in Minnesota, and at that time was at Gustavus Adolphus College, I think and I try to do this now with others too, but sometimes people see things in you that you maybe don't see in yourself. And he had initially, and I think he was maybe in the president role at that point in time for the MHCA, he had encouraged me to apply for the NATA Secondary School Committee at what I felt was a age that was too young to apply for that role. Like I didn't feel like I had been doing this long enough. But the fact that he asked kind of made me think, well, maybe I should. And so I did. And ultimately at that stage of the game, which I think was around 2008 or so, I had applied, did kind of went through the interview process and didn't get that position to be the D4 rep at that time. And then when that term ended and when it came back up around in 2011, then I kind of did the same thing again and applied again. And then I was able to be elected then at that point in time to serve on that role, and ultimately probably the most impactful thing I've probably done in my career as far as serving on that committee. It was super cool kind of at the time and engaging at the time, but yet the continuation of that role and the role that committee has continued to have even since I've been off of it now for almost 10 years. And we always have an alumni gathering at the NATA conference. And, it was hard to believe that I'd been off for almost 10 years, because you feel like you're a part of that committee always, whether it's communication, whether it's those kind of groups where we get together and talk. And so you don't ever, even though you're maybe not on the board meetings, you kind of still feel like you're pretty well involved. And we kind of have a joke that it's, you can leave, you ultimately end up, serving your time, but you don't really ever leave, because we always kind of keep you around. But and then obviously just the resources that's continued to evolve, not only with the people, but just, the data and the information and the position statements and whatever else that's being worked on has been super important for me then too. And then I think basically once I got done with that, then I kind of just felt like I was in line to kind of serve more at the state level. And that's kind of when I got involved to be president-elect. And then I was president. I served as vice president in an interim role for a little bit with the state. And currently now I'm the Gladys state rep for the Minnesota Athletic Trainers Association. So I've served in one way or shape or form on all of our executive committee roles, I guess, within the MATA, other than secretary or treasurer. And I can definitely say they don't want me to be treasurer, so I don't want to do that for sure. But
still figuring that one out as we go.
Just not a math guy, but so but then ultimately, then I think the other things, that just kind of, I got involved in a lot of concussion stuff too, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that. But I got involved in some of the concussion committees from around the state, and that really started because of the concussion law and when that got going. And because I was in the role that I was in with the secondary school committee, it kind of just became a natural fit to kind of jump into those discussions with the concussion law. And then from there, it just kind of allowed me to meet a lot of new people outside of athletic training, but in the traumatic brain injury space, that, all of a sudden afforded me a lot of other colleagues in different areas that, were asking me questions and were pulling me into situations that were really interesting. And so that was kind of, so I've served on the Department of Human Services TBI committee now for 8, 9, 10 years now, give or take. I was chair of that for a year. I'd served that term. I'm involved now in the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice as their athletic training advisory committee. I'm a KSI ambassador now for the Corey Stringer Institute. When they started that role, I kind of got involved with that, not necessarily because I needed another thing to do, but I was, when I was on the secondary school committee, that's kind of when Atlas really got started.
Sure.
And I can still remember talking in those committee meetings about how others were doing it. And Ronnie Harper down in Louisiana, who they basically were doing that in Louisiana. And that was ultimately what kind of spread it to be a nationwide thing. And he was on the committee with me at the time. And I can still remember sitting, waiting for public transportation, just chatting about how this might look for the future. And so have been in on the Atlas project pretty much from its inception. So I figured it made the most sense to obviously be an ambassador when they kind of started those roles for the states as well. And there's probably a few others I'm missing, but and when I talk to others, that's kind of, sometimes I kind of give them the background of like the different things that I've done. And then after a little bit, I'm like, oh yeah, and I'm also doing this. Oh yeah, I'm also doing this. And they think it's funny because I kind of forget when I'm involved with sometimes myself. But all that being said, I mean, how to balance it, I really, like I said, obviously having a patient family is really important, but I think you just find a way. I mean, you also have to have the awareness that you're not going to make every meeting that gets scheduled. You hope to, but obviously sometimes the schedule is just not going to allow you to kind of get to all of them. But at the same time, you just, you schedule them accordingly. And obviously sometimes they're maybe in the middle of the day, sometimes they're maybe in the evenings, and a lot of times they're on the weekends. And in the perfect situation, they kind of are spread out enough where they're not kind of piled all on top of each other. So it kind of feels like a lot. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you're like, holy cow, I have 4 of those meetings this week or whatever else it might be. But it is just kind of I guess it's more of a passion and kind of just for me, a little bit of a professional responsibility to give back as well. And, so that's why I've just kind of made it a focus for me to kind of continue in those roles and do whatever I can to help.
You kind of alluded to it, and I just wanted to see if you would be willing to, explain a little bit more depth. You just mentioned, your way of giving back. How do you explain the importance of, serving, even just at the state, not, I don't mean just, but at the state association level, all the way up to the NATA, for your staff members in particular, even younger ones, there's probably always been conversation. I don't know if it's just louder now with social media. What has the NATA done for me, or the state association? And it's easy to have those conversations when you're at a state association meeting because everybody there is obviously a believer in the state association. They're there and paying members. But how do you see that? And when you say giving back, what does that mean to you?
I think, I mean, it's, yeah, we could probably talk, forever about all of that stuff too. But I mean, I think that, obviously we all know that we got to where we are because of what others have done. And I
Sure.
think that applies not only in our professional lives, but obviously in our personal ones too. We can look to our parents or other loved ones or just other people that were important in our lives. But and I think sometimes when it comes to athletic training, sometimes those people blend together. And sometimes the mentors that we had or the people that were Hall of Famers, are people that you kind of you think back into the things that they had to do or the things that they did, or maybe a little bit of a few of the things that they had to fight through to kind of get to where we are now. And I think as much as people may complain about wherever we are at now, I don't think anybody would complain that we're better off now than we were 25, 30 years ago.
Sure.
And so all of that growth has to continue somehow. And obviously, if we don't have anybody who's willing to kind of do that service work on the back end, then a lot of it's just not going to happen at all. So obviously, I would always encourage anybody who has a lot of those questions to kind of, get involved if you can, and kind of start to see what level you can maybe, be an asset for and kind of be helpful with and provide your expertise and obviously speak your mind as well. I mean, there's positives and negatives to all those discussions and all of those board meetings. And not everybody's always in agreement. And it's okay to have that other stance because sometimes that's the stance that you need to hear to ultimately make the change that has to happen. And we know it can't be status quo. We know things have to change, but ultimately I think just, yeah, the kind of the ability to kind of just giving back to, like I said, the people who did it before us, but also in trying to lay down a better path for those coming after us also. And hopefully they make it even better. Obviously that's the goal. But that's kind of the way I would view that, I guess.
I appreciate the insight there. I'm always curious as to, what drives people into it and just where the value is seen, and so I appreciate your insight on there. One other question we had is, you've been preceptor for almost your entire career. We referenced some students before and helping them guide where they want to go in the profession. Uh, is it How many schools kind of in your area that have AT programs? Is it just the one, two?
We have
I guess
two really. We have two within about 15 miles, give or
okay.
take. So we have both, at Minnesota State University Mankato and then Gustavus Adolphus
Yep.
College that have had programs. So in those, I've been involved with both of those programs, in varying capacities, whether it's, some clinical experience, some high school clinical experiences, and then obviously, observation students through the years and, all kinds of different levels of just about everything, I guess. And, it maybe sounds a little bit weird to say, but I mean, outside of some of that professional service, I think my interaction with those students and kind of being preceptors over all those years is maybe the other thing that's been the most impactful in my kind of professional career.
Sure.
I again, kind of taking that colleague mentality, I've always, obviously those, students are there to learn, and I want them, I want to provide them the best learning environment that they possibly can have. And, but at the same time, I'm also working with them in a lot of these situations. I mean, it's a really busy athletic training room, those patients are coming in, and obviously, I'm doing this and they're helping with that, and we're all kind of working for the same goal. And obviously I'm there to help instruct and kind of interfere potentially too, if it needs to be that. But I really do feel like it's a kind of a team-based situation with those students too. So, and I've always hoped that they kind of get the same thing out of it from me. I certainly want them to utilize me as much as possible. And I always encourage them to utilize me for really ever afterwards. I always told them that after you leave that rotation or after you graduate from the school that you're going to, and I don't care if it's 2 years from now or 20 years from now, if you feel like there's a reason that you want to reach out to me about something, I want you to do it. And I want to be a resource for them, whether it's personally or professionally, if there's something that I can help with, and I always give the example of, I've had students before that have moved to other states, and I've talked to them in other situations, and they've been, I just don't have any idea who's there or what, I don't know what clinics hire, I don't know what schools are doing this, whatever. And I usually, again, because of some of that, some of that service work, I've got a contact in those areas because of something, maybe somebody that I worked with on a committee or whatever else. And then I'm like, well, I'll put you in touch with so-and-so. And that may not be specifically where you're living, but they probably have a resource within the state that can kind of help get you going too. So I want to try to at least be that conduit a little bit for them to just kind of help guide them. But, overall, it's been a really rewarding experience for me to work with those students. And I've always said that I thank them just as much as they probably thank me. And I always am somewhat in awe of watching them kind of learn. And obviously, I think all of us are in awe of the things that they're learning now and the things that we weren't maybe taught when we were in school a long time ago.
Right.
So I'm learning from them. I always say maybe just as much as they're learning from me. But it's just fun to see that and kind of work with them and kind of help continue them grow as professionals also.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Couple more topics that we're going to cover because this was going to be wide ranging. You referenced concussion a little bit and just everything you've been doing with that. You and I have been talking, just trying, as you all have been trying to get a concussion clinic kind of upstarted within the sports med department out in Mankato. Specifically, what kind of got you into concussion? Why does it continue to be such an important topic for you? Outside probably some of the obvious things that everybody's like, well, obviously concussion's important. But is there anything beyond that, if you will, that really has made that a topic of interest for you?
Yeah, well, if we circle all the way back to that car accident that I had my senior year of high school, my pretty significant accident, that I remember very little about. But at the same time, afterwards, when I start to think about that recovery, I had a hairline fracture in my pelvis that, was my limiting factor in mobility, I guess, at that point in time. And at that point, that was all that was really talked about, was the fact that, it will just kind of heal on its own and you can kind of progress back into activity as you can. And again, didn't have anybody specifically playing a role at the school. So everything I did at that time was kind of, walk when I could walk normal, jog when it was pain-free, run when it was pain-free, and then work my way back into football at that point in time, which is exactly what I did. But at the same time, I can still remember the JV football game that I was playing in then on my first game back. And I can still remember taking the handoff, cutting inside, and getting hit and laying at the sky and probably swearing as my head was spinning. And kind of at, again, at that moment, not really thinking much of it other than I knew I couldn't stay in the game at that point in time. And I came out and just said, nope, not ready yet. But looking back at the time, obviously I was so focused on the injury to my hip and my ability to function, and be mobile, and had no correlation to the head injury that I sustained in that accident. So obviously that, I think, even though it probably wasn't at that time, when I think back on it, that obviously certainly was a point in time where it, allowed me to want to learn more and to know more. And then obviously not really having the help and care, so to speak, at that point in time that I probably would have had if, it happened today. And the things that I would have learned, and not been back in the game at that point in time, if it were today, kind of sprung me forward to want to be more involved in, concussion management and concussion awareness. And then, like I said, with the concussion law, when that kind of got kicked off in, 2010, 2011, and kind of being involved in that committee. And then that kind of just, then all of a sudden when you start to do a lot of those things, obviously you just get really involved in that kind of specific area. Whereas then now all of a sudden, a lot of people start asking you questions about it. And so then all of a sudden, whether you want to become the expert, you kind of end up, even if the questions are being asked of you and you maybe don't know the answer, you're going to be the one that's going to try to find it.
Sure.
And like I said, in getting involved in some of those other situations, it was, one other opportunity that I had that, was all because of some of the kind of the collaboration that I had with other people in that TBI kind of family, so to speak, was, Senator Klobuchar had a press conference here in Minnesota back in 2014 or 2015, I think, because she was pushing at that time, a bill that would basically prohibit companies from putting advertising on their concussion products that weren't valid and weren't actually backed by science. Because obviously at that point in time, if you said you could reduce concussion by 50% if you wore this, tried this, whatever it might be,
Sure.
Parents were going to eat that up like crazy.
Yep.
So she was trying to stop the false advertising. So again, they're doing this press conference. They want people to speak at it. And all of a sudden, I'm getting notices from these other colleagues that are saying, hey, she's doing this. This would be a really good thing for you to speak at. So I was able to speak at that, which, and again, when I get those opportunities, I don't really look at it as the fact that I got the opportunity to speak at that. I look at it a little bit more as an athletic trainer got the opportunity to speak at that.
Sure.
Because I feel like and even within my role with the TBI committee also, I really am, it's more based if I want an athletic trainer involved in that committee, whether it continues to be me or whatever the situation might be. I don't want to lose the kind of the ground that we've made with having, our healthcare professional, as an athletic trainer represented on that. So I just like to kind of continue to find ways to get athletic trainers, whether it's me or somebody else, into those situations where we can kind of help make a difference.
I think that's awesome, and I really, really applaud and love the viewpoint of getting an AT to have that at the table, whether it's you or not. Just the fact to get someone there is so important. Couldn't agree more there. Anything else on concussion before we kind of move into kind of the last topic? Just because it is such a big topic, the concussion.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, I think it's important for all athletic trainers to kind of delve into the new consensus document now, and kind of learn what's in it and kind of see some of the slight changes and things that are out there. I know there's some great, obviously the paper is in depth, and obviously the research is very in depth. And I know there's a lot of podcasts and different things out there to listen to that are also very good, that kind of break some things down. But I think it's important for us to kind of stay on top of all the new information, and to kind of make sure that we're educating people. But yeah, and I think it's crazy for me to think of, because I'm old enough where, we manage concussions way differently when I started, basically to the point where, if you cleared up your symptoms within about 15 minutes and you could kind of do a couple of things, you were able to go back to play the same day.
Sure.
To what we're doing now. And obviously this continues to evolve with these consensus documents, which is great. But I still think that there's probably a time where, we look 20 years potentially down from now that we may laugh still at what we were doing today. And the fact like, oh, can you remember that we used to do this and had allowed them to do that after this amount of time, and I don't know where it's going to go, but the research is amazing, and the and the information that continues to come out is amazing. And I think it's only going to, obviously it's going to make for just safer athletics in general. And hopefully, kind of a better situation long term too for anybody who's dealt with concussions and who were, hopefully managed appropriately.
Absolutely. Kind of the last big topic. You and I just talked about this a little bit as we were trying to come up with topics for this episode. And you mentioned that you started learning a lot more about the care and working with athletes that are transgender. How is this impacting you in your career as you continue to learn more? Obviously, for whatever reasons, it can be a hot topic for people, but what have you learned? How are you applying that in your daily clinical care, and just whatever else you're willing to share around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always, saw myself as somebody that was, would be an ally for anybody who maybe falls into one of those marginalized communities.
Definitely.
And, I kind of got sprung into this a little bit more because, my daughter is transgender. And, that came up late in her high school career where she, kind of came out to us on that. And obviously that certainly kind of thrust me into that world a little bit. And to, I guess, we kind of go back to some of where I kind of gathered some of this concussion information and kind of, continued on that course. And, now obviously there was a new situation that I wanted to learn more about and kind of get more information about. And obviously, as I learned more about it, I certainly, looking at myself a little bit too, even though you feel like you do a pretty good job with, interacting with people and kind of making sure that, you're being an ally and providing a safe space, you probably still, as you learn more about it, can think of ways that you probably fell short on some of that. And so, ultimately continuing to learn more has really helped me, I think, be a better provider in that sense, and then in that, I've basically kind of taken a little bit taken it upon myself to try to provide more education to my own staff, to our staff kind of throughout the enterprise a little bit too, and doing some education sessions and kind of putting together, some of those things. And again, certainly not an expert because there are people that have done way more in this world than I have when it comes to that topic. But, I've kind of learned from them, taken information from them. And the Safe Space Ally training that the NATA offers on their professional development is a great resource. You get CEUs for it. I can't remember now if it's 1.5 or 2.5. But it's certainly it's a tremendous program, and certainly a lot of the things that I'm kind of conveying to my staff is being pulled pretty much directly from that, either the one that's online that you can do there, and I've done some in-person ones at our GLATA conference as well. But it's certainly kind of allowed me to, because we're all going to, I guess what I like to say is, ultimately we're the healthcare providers for everyone. And it doesn't matter, who somebody, how they identify, what their sexual orientation is, whatever it might be, if they're coming to us, we're there to provide care for them, and no matter what that situation is. And so we better be equipped to be able to prepare and to know what we need to know in those situations as well, to not only provide the care that we need, but also be an ally. And we all know, I think, in the athletic training rooms that we've worked in throughout our careers, that a lot of people will come to that room as a safe space. And I think that we need to continue to utilize that as a safe space. And obviously that can extend into our clinics. And I think we can have a voice within our clinics also, that if we see things within our clinics that maybe aren't in a situation where we could do better, whether it's the forms that we have people fill out, or maybe some signage that's up, or maybe advocating for different things as we start to, if there is some renovation that's going to be done, maybe you can put more of a general neutral bathroom in, or whatever the situation might be. Try to be a voice and maybe not just always sit back. We may not always get what we want. We know we're dealing with sometimes higher powers sometimes, but at least I think we can sit back at the end of the day and say we tried, and I think that's important. But ultimately, I think that, just continuing to provide that safe space, learn as much as we can, is certainly the way to go. And I'm certainly open to anybody who ever would want to reach out to me, if they certainly want to ask questions or get more information. But like I said, I feel like, the NATA has a tremendous amount of resources, through the LGBTQIA plus page itself and some of their committees. It's got a great Twitter account with a lot of information also. And then, the Trevor Project has some great information as far as the website goes, and there's a number of other ones. But, if you really want to dive into it, there is a ton of information out there, and the statistics are, honestly pretty sad when we start to compare, some of the suicide rates from, people who are in those marginalized communities and the ones that aren't. And, it kind of, in a way, to me anyway, it makes you want to do better. Because if maybe one of those situations, if you can be an ally for one person that maybe they're having a hard time in whatever space that they're in otherwise, and that potentially helps change their mind on some of those things, that's a huge impact. And I think it's important for us to at least to try to provide that opportunity for that.
Completely agree, and appreciate everything that you said there, and just sharing more about it. Having never worked with anybody openly knowing that they were transgender, that's always something I've tried to keep in mind as well. Is we're there for them, and that should be part of our role. It's a lot. It can be a lot, and I haven't dug into it nearly as much as obviously you have and many other people. But yeah, I think that duty falls upon us in the role that we've taken.
Yeah, and I think as athletic trainers, we all know we're going to have it at some point in time. Whether it's in our high schools, whether it's in our colleges, whether it's in our clinic settings, at some point in time, we're all going to interact with somebody within that, kind of queer umbrella, so to speak, as they like to use that term, that falls somewhere in there. And again, just kind of being aware. And I think pronoun use is extremely important. I think that can be a pretty big sign also that, whether you use it on your email signatures or whatever else it might be, to try to at least convey that you are an ally. And I could certainly see a time too where we, some greetings, I think, we'll get to the point where a lot of times, we maybe even be just sharing our pronouns very publicly as much as we do our name and how we kind of talk to people. And I know in talking to teachers and all the way down to middle school that, it's a very impactful thing for them. And they've, certainly had to modify, how they kind of teach and how they identify with with their students at that point in time. So it's certainly, something that's going to impact all of us in one way, shape, or form, some more than others, certainly. But I think we'd be naive to think that we're never going to encounter it.
Sure. We covered a wide variety of topics in not too long of a time. Anything else that you wanted to cover that we may have skipped over before we jump into those AT chat questions?
I don't think so. I think we got it pretty well covered.
Yeah, I think we did well for covering quite a wide variety. First one then, where do you see athletic training going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I kind of talked a little bit about, that we, I certainly see what's happened before us to what's happening now to what's happening in the future. But I think there's going to just be that continued job growth in general. I think we're going to continue to see just new areas where athletic trainers are working in, which just continues to show kind of our ability to work in a lot of different settings and to be really unique as healthcare providers in that situation. I think we'll probably continue to see a little bit of expansion in third-party reimbursement as well. And I think, we're on the way, and we have a lot of data and a lot of states that have done a lot of work within that. And, I think we're only going to learn from those successes and continue to build on them. And obviously we've got, Practice Act things and governmental affair things to do at all levels to probably, make some of those changes continue to happen, more often and easier. But I certainly, see that that's certainly going to be something that's going to be more prevalent as we continue to move forward. And then I think too, as we just kind of see the transition now with our colleges and our universities and the education program, I think the I don't even know what to call it, the change necessarily, but just the general growth of our profession when it comes to the educational level and the things that they're doing now and the things that they're coming out equipped to do, I think is just going to continue to grow, kind of our skill set as athletic trainers, and us older athletic trainers then kind of continue to catch up. And, whether it's, just adding more tools to the toolbox, so to speak, they obviously, some of our new grads are benefited with the fact that they got to learn it as in their education programs, and some of us may end up having to learn it outside of that, but yet we all do that every day anyway. If there's a certain content area that we want to get better at, we're going to take some additional training and do other things and get involved and kind of learn more things, to whether it's achieving a certification or just learning more about it, whatever it might be.
Agreed. If you could go back and give yourself some advice as an young athletic trainer, what would it be? And can you set kind of when you would go back to tell yourself that advice?
I think the most specific example, if I want to get specific, and I can generalize maybe the question and the answer too, but ACL injuries specifically. When I was in school, I felt like doing a Lockman's and an anterior drawer test was going to be the most obvious thing that I could ever do to identify an ACL injury. And then it probably took me only a few months into it to realize that it just doesn't work that way. So that's a specific example, but the general example is just that, ultimately the things that you learn in the textbook and those tests that you do and the things that you kind of just went over and over of what a positive test was and what a negative test was, we don't really talk a lot about what the in-between test is that doesn't really fit. It's like, well, this wasn't really positive, but yet they're still having this, and the history kind of says this.
Sure.
So a lot of times now I tell a lot of the students, and I certainly give them that information too, to not prepare for the fact that this very specific list of tests is going to give you this kind of algorithm that this was positive and now this is going to lead to this. Because a lot of times it's not always going to lead to that. And a lot of times the story that the patient tells you and the history of that can probably guide you 75% of the way, almost sometimes more than sometimes your specific special tests do. But yeah, overall, just not quite what you learned in the textbook, I guess. Would be kind of my general answer.
I like that one. I distinctly remember I was like, I'm going to come up with templates for rehab. It's going to make my life so much easier. Here's what we're going to do. And then I feel like you could still kind of ish do that, but just knowing that none of them respond the same. And I always argue, what kind of makes you good as a rehab professional is figuring out where along that continuum you can drop people and then how fast you can push them and when to pull back. And that just comes with time and feel and getting to know your patient. And no textbook can prep you for that, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
What has been the most influential resource you've found in your career?
I think I already touched on it a little bit when I was talking about the committee work, but certainly the NATA Secondary School Committee probably has been my most influential resource. But I would even, and I talked about that a little bit when we talked about it, but I would even kind of piggyback off of that to something else I've probably already mentioned. But I think the other influential resources have been everybody that I've interacted with and worked with, whether that's committee members, colleagues, students, coworkers, bosses, whatever the situation might be. All of those people kind of have made me what I am today, I guess. So I would say all of those have been, in general, influential resources. But certainly the secondary school committee specifically has been by far the thing that has probably impacted me the most in my career.
I think that's the first time we've had a committee be mentioned as the most influential resource. So kudos for originality.
There you go.
As an AT in your role, how do you take care of yourself?
It's tough. We all talk about burnout and we all know there's a lot of hours. And, for me and the people who know me well know that I'm an early person and that early part of my day is kind of my me time. It's the time that I do use for exercise. It's the time that I kind of take for my hobbies and kind of the time that I take for my kind of non-work, computer time, whether that's watching YouTube videos that are fun for me to watch, and not maybe work related. Sometimes obviously that time is also used for work because sometimes you just feel like you got to catch up. And if that's the time you got to do it, that's the time you got to do it. But overall, I definitely think that the hobbies that I have, which I enjoy being outdoors and I enjoy fishing and I enjoy golfing. However, neither of those things I get much time to do. So I love to say that I like to do it, but I definitely do not get the time to do it like I would like to do. I have collected football cards since I was 4 years old. So well over 4 decades now of collecting. And I'm also a big Detroit Lions fan, so anybody can hold that against me if they want. But that's been, but a lot of my kind of interest outside of work is that. And I think it does, even though it's also still more time, it's more kind of, I don't want to call it work because it's fun, but it's the other things that you're doing that kind of just allow you to kind of disconnect a little bit, do something that you enjoy and love. Just maybe as much as the profession that you're serving. But that's probably been the way though that I've tried to help balance that a little bit, and ultimately that makes my days longer sometimes because obviously I'm not sleeping as much. But it's certainly just the kind of my mental health time, I guess, to kind of kind of reset and do the things that I enjoy.
Awesome. You could change or eliminate one thing, could be a modality, a common practice, or a mindset in the field of athletic training. What would it be?
Whew, well, a lot of things there probably. I mean, I would we talked a lot, about kind of the social media aspect of things and the way people, sometimes obviously attack in certain ways, and that happens not just in athletic training, it happens everywhere in every kind
Sure.
of level of anything. From a mindset perspective, it'd be great if that just kind of mindset would go away and people would just kind of, kind of use the can't we all just get along theory. But like I've said before, I mean, obviously we need other opinions to grow. So I mean, I appreciate that aspect of it. Otherwise, though, the thing that probably bothers me the most, obviously, is just the lack of communication from the people that you need it from. And so, obviously, sometimes when we're dealing with our schools and colleges or any of the people that we're working with, the lack of information when it comes to scheduled changes or things like that we're just not notified of, probably by far bothers me the most. It bothers me the most, obviously, because a lot of times I'm the one trying to coordinate those schedules. But even if it's involving me directly, I just, you kind of want to come back with a side, you're like, I can guarantee that you let the officials or the umpires know about this change. So why didn't we, learn about this change? So those types of things just probably, those bug me the most. So I guess, in that I would love to eliminate that and kind of make everybody just communicate with us the way they communicate with everybody else to make their organizations run smoothly.
It would be nice. It's so much nicer to be asked than to be told.
That is true. Or just to be expected.
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Not sometimes not even told. Just
Yeah,
you should know.
right.
Um, Last question. What does being an athletic trainer mean to you?
Oh, that's a deep question too, ultimately, and I think all of us are pretty passionate about what we do, and I think that's really important. But athletic trainers wear a lot of different hats. And I think, that we provide, and I kind of mentioned this before too, but we kind of provide a really unique and essential role in healthcare and the healthcare community. And so I see that in all the settings. And, I think the fact that we do have that unique role, I think that shows in the fact that we're in all of these settings. When we talk about
Hmm.
where athletic trainers work, it just keeps continuing to grow. And obviously that shows kind of who we are as healthcare professionals and the kind of impact that we can have in, patients of all ages and all different, areas. So I guess then it kind of, the question then kind of comes down to kind of those hats maybe a little bit that we do wear. I think, we obviously wear the hat of a healthcare provider. We wear the hat of being a learner. We wear the hat of being an educator. We obviously wear the hat of, being kind of an emergency action plan expert, and then ultimately the emergency care provider. And especially when we talk about, kind of those 4 H's that become important in emergency care, when it comes to heat and heat illness and the heart and the cardiac issues. And obviously we just had the issue with LeBron James's son who just collapsed also. And
Yep.
our Hamlin incident, obviously this past January, that were obviously more public big things, but we know it's happening all the time. And, so we need to continue to raise more awareness. And I think that will continue to help. But, ultimately, obviously then, the concussion stuff and the head things and sickle cell trait and all of the important things when it comes to just sudden death. And the fact that, again, we're always going to be the ones that are asked to provide the kind of the policies and the care for those situations. That being said, too, we wear the hat as a lifesaver, and many times as well. Obviously, we talked about this a little bit too, but just kind of being a safe space, whether it's a mental health safe space or just being an ally for the people who need us. And obviously, that can go through any of those areas that we talked about in the LGBTQIA community, or it can just be that person that's injured and just needs somebody to talk to. And sometimes we're that person. And ultimately, I think just, it means that we're being a professional and that, we have a responsibility in general that carries with that. And I think all of those things provide, allow us to provide the athletic training services and true services and not just coverage. Coverage is probably the word that bugs me the most when I see it in anything. I always take it out and change it, because obviously sets a different example. I feel like if we're there to just provide coverage, it makes it feel like we're just there kind of to just in case. But we want to be there for obviously those just in case situations, but we also want to be there to prevent those things from happening and to be there afterwards to help it get better too. That's a really long answer to what it means to me, but those are a lot of the things that it means.
That's important. It's not a simple answer, no matter how you put it, with a lot of things, and all good reasons for it to mean a lot to you. Just to wrap up then, people wanted to connect with you, follow with you, reach out, what would be the best way? We'll link up everything on the episode page, but if you wanted to share what would be the easiest way, please do.
Yeah, I mean, I think email probably is always going to be the easiest way, and the way that I'm probably always going to see that. And that, it's Hoehn, it's Hoehn.troy@mayo.edu. But I've got a Twitter page, I've got an Instagram page, I've got a Facebook page. The Instagram page is going to be primarily littered with football cards. So if you want to just kind of connect in that way, then that's the spot to connect with me at for sure. Sometimes that can be just a fun side of things too. And I try to share a little bit of educational things. I'm not a huge social media guy necessarily, obviously, but I really appreciate the people that are and really get the information out. And I really like to share and retweet the people that are doing those things too. But any of those options certainly are available.
Oh, we appreciate that. And if people want to get in touch with you, I highly recommend it. Troy's a great resource and fun to talk to. Good to catch up with. So recommend doing that. But I appreciate you taking the time, kind of sharing your story and all the different things that you've done and are doing and continue to do, and just your perspective on things.
Absolutely, Joel. I appreciate it. And I thank you for doing this too. I think, again, these mediums are super important to allow people to learn more about people's backgrounds and to get information. And I've enjoyed watching past episodes of this and look forward to future ones as well. So I appreciate you doing this and getting this rolling.
Well, we appreciate you listening. So thank you for that. But yeah, until our next monthly call, we'll talk to you later.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Athletic Training Chat with Troy Hoehn. Hope you took something away from it. I know I did. It was great to get even deeper into everything that Troy does, even though I've gotten to know him, and just the importance of continuing to push forward for everything that you believe to make the athletic training profession great. As always, thank you to Mueller Sports Medicine for sponsoring our podcast. We truly appreciate it, and the people there. If you are interested in journaling and want to give it a try, check out our Athletic Training Daily Journal. There is a 14-day sample at clinicallypress.org in the shop section, completely free, no payment info necessary. Just sign up to download it, see what you think, and then you can find the digital version there or on Amazon. It's a great way to reflect on leadership, management, communication, development, your practice, cognitive biases, all kinds of areas that we can all continually be working on to try and improve ourselves and ourselves as professionals. Thanks again for listening. We truly, truly appreciate it, and we'll catch you next episode.